I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck the morning after my father's funeral, holding what was left of his promise, a curl of leather, a line of his handwriting. The words to my son Caleb burned at the edge. The notebook had been in his desk for 50 years. By the time I walked in to get it, it was already in the fire pit out back.
This is the story of a son who gave up a college scholarship and 22 years of his life to keep his father's dairy farm alive. It is the story of a sister who built a marketing career 2,000 miles away and visited twice a year. And it is the story of a single weekend, 3 days before a funeral, when every promise that had ever been made between a father and his son was quietly turned into ash. This is The Boones own 240 acres of dairy land in southern Wisconsin, 3 miles outside the town of Brodhead. Walter Boone had inherited the farm from his own father in 1979. He milked 60 jerseys twice a day for 30 years. His wife Helen died of cancer in 2000. He was left with 2 children. Sloane was the older one. By the time Caleb was 18, he had been accepted into the University of Wisconsin Madison on a full agricultural engineering scholarship. He was going to design irrigation systems for farms larger than his father could imagine. He had a duffel bag packed by the front door. He had a roommate assignment. He had a class schedule for the fall of 2003. Walter Boone had his first stroke on a Tuesday morning in May. Caleb found him on the floor of the milking parlor at 5:30 in the morning. The ambulance took 40 minutes to get there. The hospital in Janesville stabilized him. The doctor said he would walk again, but he would never carry a hay bale or run a milking line. The dairy was a 2-person operation on a good day. Walter could no longer be one of them.
I called Madison next afternoon. I told the admissions office I needed to defer for a year. The woman on the phone was kind about it. She said it happened more than I would think. I told her I would be back in the fall of 2004. I really believed that. I had no idea I was making a promise I would not keep for the next 22 years.
I was a junior at NYU when Dad had his first stroke. I was on a study program in Madrid. I came home for 2 weeks in the summer and then I went back to school. Caleb wanted to stay. Nobody made him stay. He chose it. I have spent 20 years correcting people who say I left him with the farm. I did not leave him with anything. He picked it up.
Caleb was up at 4:30 every morning. He ran the milking lines alone. He fed the calves, he walked the fence lines, he ordered the feed. He kept the books on the kitchen table after midnight. By the spring of 2005, the dairy was breaking even. By 2007, it was making a small profit again. Walter would sit on the porch and watch his son cross the yard with a bucket in each hand.
Dad started saying it that first summer. He would say it from the porch chair, the tractor seat, the kitchen table. He would say it like it was a fact, not a promise. He would say, "This place is yours, son. You earn it every morning." He said it the day I turned 20. He said it the day I turned 30. He said it the day I turned 40. He never wrote it down where I could see it.
Sloane finished her degree at NYU and stayed in Manhattan. She took an entry-level job at a marketing firm in Midtown. She moved into a walk-up in Hell's Kitchen. She worked late. She climbed. By 2012, she was running her own accounts. By 2017, she was a senior brand director earning $400,000 a year. She visited Brodhead twice a year. Crisp.
I had a girlfriend for 2 years. Her name was Jenna. She lived in Janesville. She loved me. She came out to the farm every weekend for almost a year. Then she sat me down in the kitchen one Sunday in February and said she could not live in a place where the morning starts in the dark. I understood her. I did not blame her. I went back to the milking the next day.
Walter Boone had his second stroke on a March morning in 2018. This one took the right side of his body and most of his speech. The hospice nurse came twice a week. Caleb moved a wooden recliner into the front room next to the hospital bed. He slept in that recliner for 14 months. He ran the dairy in the gaps between morphine doses.
People act like I disappeared during those years. I called Dad every Sunday. I sent him cards on his birthday. I paid for the upgraded hospice equipment when the basic kit was not enough. The hospital bed alone was $9,000. I paid for it without telling Caleb. I did not need credit. I just needed Dad to...
On a clear Saturday morning in June of 2019, Walter asked Caleb to help him sit up in the bed. He could speak more clearly that day. He asked Caleb to bring him the leather binder from the top right drawer of the desk in the office. The binder had been there since 1968. It held the original deed to the farm and the records of every cow Walter had ever owned. Caleb brought him the binder and a fountain pen. Walter wrote a single page in his own hand. The page said this: Caleb Boone has earned this farm. The 240 acres, the house, the equipment, and every animal in the herd. It is his. I am of sound mind on this 22nd day of June 2019. Walter J. Boone. He signed it. He asked Caleb to walk down the road and bring back Margaret Hale, who had lived on the next farm since Caleb.
Walter handed me the page when I sat down beside the bed. He read it out loud. His hand was shaking, but his eyes were clear. He asked me to sign as a witness. I signed. I dated it. He thanked me. He folded the page and put it back inside the leather binder. The binder went back into the top right drawer of the desk. I did one other thing the morning after Walter signed that page. Something I never told Caleb. Something that, 3 years later, would be the only piece of paper standing between his father's promise and complete erasure. I drove into Brodhead and I made a photocopy.
Sloane Boone arrived at the farm without warning on the second Tuesday of November, 2020. She had taken 3 days off work and driven herself from O'Hare in a rental car. She told Caleb she was concerned about Dad's affairs. She used that word, affairs. Caleb was in the milking parlor when she pulled up. He came out wiping his hands on a rag. He had not seen her since the previous Christmas.
Dad's mind was slipping. I could hear it in the phone calls. He would forget which decade he was in. He would call me Helen sometimes. Helen was our mother. She had been dead for 20 years. I came back to make sure his estate was in order. That is what responsible adult children do for parents who can no longer manage their own paperwork. There was nothing sinister about that.
Sloane spent the next 3 afternoons sitting alone with Walter in the front room. Caleb was outside doing the morning milking, then the feed run, then the fence walk. Each evening when Caleb came in, Sloane would be in the kitchen making tea. Walter would be asleep. Sloane would say he was tired. They had been talking about old times. On the third day, a man arrived at the farmhouse in a charcoal suit. He had driven from Madison. He was carrying a leather attaché case. Sloane introduced him to Caleb as a friend from grad school who was passing through on his way to a conference in Milwaukee. The man went into the front room. He stayed for 1 hour. He came out, shook Caleb's hand, said it was nice to meet him, and got back in his car. Caleb did not...
I asked Dad about it that night. I sat on the edge of the bed and I said, "Who was the man in the suit?" Dad looked at me for a long time. Then he said he did not remember a man in a suit. He said Sloane had been reading to him from a magazine. I told Sloane the next morning. She said Dad was having confused episodes and we should not put weight on what he remembered. I went back.
Sloane returned to Manhattan the following Sunday. She did not visit again until the funeral, 18 months later. The visit was never spoken about between brother and sister. There was no follow-up phone call about Dad's affairs. There was no paperwork passed back and forth. Caleb assumed nothing had been signed because nobody had asked him to sign anything.
I knew that lawyer, not personally, but I had spent 28 years in the county clerk's office before I retired. I had seen his name on 100 estate documents. He worked for the kind of law firm you hire when you want something done quietly and you do not mind paying for it. The day I saw his car turn into the Boone driveway, I wrote the date in my own daybook. November 12th.
Walter Boone had his third and final stroke on March 9, 2022. Caleb found him at 6 in the morning. A hospice nurse came within the hour. Walter did not regain full consciousness after that. He spent his last 9 weeks in the front room of the house, in the bed his daughter had paid for, with his son sleeping in the wooden recliner 3 feet away. Sloane was told. Sloane sent flowers.
Dad died at 5:40 in the morning on May 4th. I was holding his hand. The nurse had been there an hour earlier. She told me to call her when it happened. I called Sloane first. I told her who was gone. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she would catch the next flight and handle the funeral. She told me I had done enough. She told me to get some sleep.
I went out to the barn and started the milking.
Sloane arrived in Brodhead that evening. She told Caleb she would stay at the house and take care of the arrangements. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday at the United Methodist Church on Walnut Street. Caleb spent the next 3 nights in the bunkhouse next to the barn because he could not sleep in the house with his father gone. Sloane spent those 3 nights alone in the farmhouse. She told Caleb she was going.
I went through every drawer in that office because somebody had to. Dad had not filed a tax return correctly in 4 years. There were unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. There were checks he had written and never sent. Caleb was a wonderful son, but he was not a financial manager. I was the one who had to make sense of all of it before the lawyers got involved.
The funeral was on Saturday, May 9th, at 10 in the morning. 200 people came, old farmers from across the county. The veterinarian who had cared for the herd for 30 years. The retired school teachers who had taught Walter's children. Caleb spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about his father's hands. He talked about the way his father had taught him to listen for a cow that was about to calve. He did not cry until 3 days after the funeral. Caleb Boone walked into a law office in Madison wearing his only suit. The lawyer behind the desk was the same man in the charcoal suit who had visited the farm 18 months earlier. The will he opened was dated November 19, 2020. Sloane sat next to Caleb. She did not look at him. The lawyer read the will out loud. The estate of Walter J. Boone consisted of 240 acres of farmland, the house and outbuildings, the dairy equipment, and the herd. Total assessed value, $1,400,000. The will instructed the executor to liquidate all assets within 90 days of probate and to divide the net proceeds equally between the 2 surviving children. Sloane Boone.
I sat there and I did not say a single word. I did not understand what was happening. I kept waiting for the lawyer to read the part about the farm coming to me. He never did. He just kept reading. Liquidate, sell, divide. Sloane was crying very softly into a tissue. The lawyer said this was what our father wanted. I stood up. I walked out of the office. I drove home in the rain.
Caleb walked into the farmhouse, into the office, and pulled open the top right drawer of the desk. The leather binder was not there. He pulled open every other drawer. He pulled the drawer all the way out and looked behind it. He went into the bedroom. He went into the closet. He went into the kitchen. He went outside, into the side yard, and his eyes landed.
I knew before I walked over to it. I could see the curl of leather sticking out of the ash. The fire pit had been used recently. There were footprints around it in the dirt. I reached into the ash with my bare hand and I pulled out what was left, a burned curl with 3 words still legible on the inside. To my son, I sat on the ground next to the fire pit for a long time.
Caleb called my house at 3 in the afternoon. His voice was steady, but it was the steady that comes after something has already broken. I drove over with my file. I had kept the photocopy in a manila folder in my own desk for 3 years. I knew the day I made it that I might need it one day. I just did not know what day. I sat at his kitchen table and I put the photocopy in front of him.
Caleb drove the photocopy to a Janesville attorney named Reuben Crocker the next morning. Crocker had handled small estate fights for 30 years. He looked at the photocopy for 30 seconds. He asked Caleb if he had the original. Caleb said no. Crocker put the photocopy down on his desk. He said, without the original, with a notarized will signed 2 years later, "You have a fight."
I told Crocker to file it anyway. I told him I would pay him by the hour. I sold a tractor that week to put the retainer down. He filed a contest of the will in Rock County Circuit Court 14 days later. The hearing was set for September. Sloane was served the papers in Manhattan. She flew back the day after the service was completed.
Discovery in that case turned up a single piece of paper that explained almost everything. The Madison law firm that drafted Walter's new will had been on a private retainer with Sloane Boone's marketing firm in Manhattan since 2017. The retainer was $3,000 a month. It was paid out of a corporate account that had no marketing purpose.
The retainer was a consulting relationship. The firm advised me on tax strategy and trust planning for my own personal finances. Of course, they ended up being the natural choice when Dad needed a will updated. I trusted them. They were already familiar with our family situation. Caleb wants to twist that into a conspiracy. There was no conspiracy.
On the stand, Sloane denied every accusation calmly. She said she had never seen the leather binder. She said she had never burned anything in the fire pit. She said she had spent those 3 nights at the farmhouse organizing tax documents and sorting through old photographs. The judge accepted the will into probate. He ruled that Margaret Hale's photocopy was inadmissible because Margaret was a longtime family friend with implied bias.
The herd was auctioned in Madison on a Saturday morning in October, 62 jerseys. I had hand-raised 20 of them as calves. I knew every one of them by name. I stood by the chute as they walked through. The lead cow was a 14-year-old named Honey. I had pulled her out of her mother in the barn in 2009. The auctioneer sold her to a feedlot in Iowa. The trailer pulled away at 11:06 in the morning.
The farm itself sold 3 weeks later to an industrial corn and soy operation based in central Illinois. They paid $1,120,000. The buyers told the realtor on the day of the closing that they intended to flatten the dairy barn before the first snow. They would tear out the maple windbreak Walter had planted as a young man in 1979. They would plant corn over the entire 240 acres.
I watched the bulldozer arrive on a cold morning in December. I stood at my kitchen window and I watched a 50-year-old dairy barn come down in less than an hour. I watched the maple windbreak go down over the next 2 days. The wind has not been the same on this stretch of road since. You can hear it in the spring now. There is no...
Caleb Boone walked away from the closing with $620,000 after legal fees. He used part of it to buy 18 acres of pasture on the eastern edge of Greene County. He bought a small herd of 12 jerseys from a retiring farmer outside Monroe. He moved into a single-room cabin on the new land. He started over at the age of 41. He did not call his sister.
People ask me if I am bitter about losing the farm. I am not. The farm is just dirt and a building. The dirt is still there. Somebody else will plant on it. That part I can accept. The part I cannot accept is that the last thing my father ever wrote about me, in his own hand, was burned in a fire pit by somebody who knew exactly.
I gave my brother $620,000. That is not a small amount of money. I followed Dad's last legal wishes as documented by a Wisconsin attorney. The court agreed with me. The judge agreed with me. I am not the villain in this story. Caleb wanted to keep the farm. Dad wanted both of his children to be treated fairly. Those two things were not the same.
6 months after the farm sold, Sloane Boone resigned from the marketing firm in Manhattan. She used her share of the inheritance to buy a small loft in Tribeca. She launched her own brand consultancy. She has not returned to Wisconsin since the closing. She did not come to the small memorial Caleb held at his cabin on the first anniversary of their father's death. She sent flowers, white
It took me almost a year to figure out what really hurt about this case. The promise was real. Walter wrote it. Walter signed it. I witnessed it. The signature was genuine. The page was a legal document by every standard I had learned in 28 years at the county clerk's office. The only difference between that promise and a will that wins in court was the...
I keep the burned curl in a small wooden box on a shelf above the kitchen sink in the cabin. 3 words, to my son. That is all I have left of the actual page. Sometimes I think about throwing it away because there is nothing useful about it. But then I think, this is the last sentence my father ever wrote with my name in it. So I keep it. I do not look at it often.
The cabin sits on a low ridge with a view east toward the river. The 12 jerseys graze in the south field. The morning milking starts at 5. Caleb does it alone. There is no porch chair where his father can sit and watch him cross the yard with a bucket in each hand. There is just the cabin and the herd and a wooden box on a shelf above the sink.
I have lived next to the Boone farm for 41 years. I knew Walter Boone before he was a father. I knew his wife. I knew both of his children when they were small enough to ride on a tractor seat in his lap. I have seen 100 small farms in this county, handed down from one generation to the next. Most of those handoffs happened on a Sunday afternoon with a verbal agreement and a handshake.
None of them ever needed a Madison law firm.
Walter Boone made a real promise to his son. He wrote it himself. He dated it. He signed it. He asked a neighbor to witness it. By every standard I learned in 28 years inside a county clerk's office, what Walter wrote that morning in June of 2019 was a legal document. A holographic codicil. The only thing it lacked was protection.
The person who knew where it was kept was the person who made sure it never reached a courtroom.
Was the betrayal the will or the fire that came before it? Could Sloane Boone have been right about her father's wishes, even if she was wrong about the way she enforced them? Tell me what you think. Tell me in the comments.
Next week, on After the Will, a daughter who came home for her father's last 6 months walked into his bedroom on a Tuesday morning and discovered the man in the hospice bed was no longer her father at all. Someone else's name was on the deed to the house. The signature was his. The date was 3 weeks before he stopped speaking. She had 10 days to figure out what had happened and who had been in the room when it did.